60 acres of rolling hills covered in apple trees, their branches heavy with fruit that feeds families across 3 counties. This isn't just any farm, it's my grandfather's legacy, planted during the hardest times this country has ever seen. The Great Depression for over 30 years. I've walked these same rows my grandfather planted with calloused hands and unwavering hope. Every spring blossom, every autumn harvest, tells the story of 3 generations who believed in hard work, community, and the American dream. But sometimes, the American dream collides with something else entirely, entitlement. As our little corner of rural America grew, new subdivisions began appearing like mushrooms after rain. Shiny houses with perfect lawns, populated by families seeking their own slice of paradise. At first, I welcomed the growth. More neighbors meant more community, right? How wrong I was. Enter our antagonist, let's call her, Karen. Because honestly, if the shoe fits, Karen wasn't just any resident. She was the self-appointed queen of the newly formed Homeowners Association. Armed with a clipboard and an attitude that could sour fresh cider, she patrolled her domain like a general inspecting troops. One sweltering afternoon, while I was checking the irrigation lines that keep my trees healthy, I noticed something unusual. A cluster of people stood at my property line looking wildly out of place. They were dressed like they were attending a country club luncheon, not visiting a working farm, and there, center stage, was Karen. She stood pointing at my apple trees, my grandfather's. Trees gesticulating wildly to 2 bewildered police officers. I could hear her voice carrying across the field, sharp and demanding. I walked over, dirt under my fingernails, sweat on my brow, the honest marks of a day's work. Afternoon, folks. Can I help you with something? Karen whirled around, her eyes narrowing like she'd discovered something distasteful on her designer shoe. Finally. You're the owner of this situation. She gestured dismissively at 60 acres of productive farmland. This orchard is completely unacceptable. It's attracting insects and rodents into our community. The Homeowners Association has voted unanimously it needs to go. All of it. I felt my heart skip. I'm sorry, what do you mean by go? She lifted her chin with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her adult life. Cut down, removed, eliminated. These trees are destroying our property values. The officers exchanged glances that said everything. Their professional demeanor wouldn't allow them to speak. Aloud, sir. One officer addressed me. Are you the legal owner of this property? Every square inch, I replied, my voice steady, despite the absurdity of the situation. It's been in my family since 1932, Karen huffed like I'd given the wrong answer to a simple math problem. That's completely irrelevant. Our HOA bylaws clearly state that any structure or landscaping visible from within our community boundaries must meet our aesthetic standards. These trees are a clear violation. Now, friends, I've faced down droughts that lasted months, hailstorms that destroyed entire crops, and market crashes that nearly cost us everything. But nothing had prepared me for the sheer audacity of what I was hearing. Ma'am, I said, leaning on my shovel like my grandfather used to, this is working farmland. These trees aren't decoration, they're my livelihood. They feed families. You can't just demand I destroy my family's heritage because you don't like the view. Her face turned a shade of red. I'd only seen on my ripest apples. She jabbed her manicured finger at the officers. Arrest him! He's refusing to comply with our regulations. He's in violation. The officer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, we don't enforce HOA rules. This gentleman is on his own private property. That's when I saw at the moment Karen realized she had no idea who she was dealing with. But she was about to find out, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, asterisk. After the officers left, shaking their heads and probably sharing a good laugh once they reached their patrol car, Karen marched toward me. Her high heels sank into the soft earth with each determined step-earth that had been feeding this community longer than her subdivision had existed. You don't understand how this works, she declared. Pulling her heel from the dirt with obvious annoyance, the HOA governs this entire area. Your little farm falls under our jurisdiction whether you like it or not. I took a deep breath, thinking of my grandfather's patience when dealing with difficult people. Ma'am, your HOA has authority over your subdivision. My farm isn't part of your community. Your rules simply don't apply here. But reason wasn't Karen's strong suit. Her eyes flashed with the kind of fury reserved for people who've never been told they can't have everything they want. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll pursue legal action. You'll regret standing in the way of progress. I couldn't help but chuckle, not mockingly, but with the weary amusement of someone who's weathered real storms. Lady, I've survived droughts that lasted 2 years, floods that washed away entire crops, and even a tornado that cut a path right through this property back in 2003. You think a homeowners association is going to intimidate me? That was the declaration of war. What followed was a campaign of harassment that would have impressed a military strategist. Karen filed complaint after complaint with the county. My orchard was a fire hazard, she claimed, a breeding ground for pests, a public nuisance that endangered her pristine neighborhood. The inspectors came out, looked around, shook my hand, and left with smiles on their faces. Everything was perfectly legal, properly maintained, and up to code. But Karen wasn't deterred by little things like facts or regulations. Then came the bills. Official-looking invoices for HOA fees for property that was clearly outside their boundaries. I sent them back unopened, but they kept coming, along with increasingly threatening letters about enforcement actions. The psychological warfare escalated. Trucks from the subdivision would park along my fence at dawn, laying on their horns to disturb my sleep and spook my livestock. Groups of teenagers, clearly encouraged by their parents, would sneak into the orchard after dark, having apple fights and leaving piles of wasted fruit rotting on the ground. But the final straw came on a crisp October night. I was doing my evening rounds, checking the equipment and making sure everything was secure. When I heard the sound of spray paint hitting wood, I grabbed my flashlight and caught someone red-handed, painting HOA rules across the side of my grandfather's old barn. Voice becomes more determined that night. I made a phone call to an old friend, a lawyer who specialized in property rights and harassment cases. When I finished explaining the situation, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then he chuckled. Not a pleasant chuckle, the kind of sound a shark might make if sharks could laugh. Robert, he said, they picked the wrong farmer. We're going to make sure they understand that your property is legally protected agricultural land. And if they continue this harassment campaign, we'll hit them with a lawsuit so comprehensive they'll be apologizing with interest for the next decade. But Karen didn't know something important about the farmer she was trying to bully. I wasn't just any apple grower. Before returning to run the family farm full-time, I had spent 25 years as a district judge. I knew the law from every angle. And I had connections throughout the legal community that Karen couldn't even imagine. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to begin. Asterisk. Karen's arrogance finally led her to cross a line that would cost her dearly. On a fog-shrouded morning in November, I discovered something that made my blood boil. A landscaping truck was parked on my property, and men with chainsaws were approaching my trees. Not the old ones that needed pruning healthy. Productive apple trees that were ready for next year's harvest. Thank goodness for the security cameras I'd installed after the spray painting incident. I confronted the crew immediately, with everything being recorded. Excuse me? What do you think you're doing? The crew chief looked confused. We were hired by the HOA to remove these trees. We were told you'd been notified. You're on private property without permission, and nobody authorized any tree removal. You need to leave now. They packed up quickly, apologizing profusely and explaining that they'd been told the HOA had legal authority to order the work. The evidence I needed was captured in crystal clear video. My lawyer filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Karen personally and the HOA as an organization. The charges included criminal trespassing, attempted destruction of private property, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. When the court date arrived, it felt like the entire subdivision had turned out. Word had spread through the community like wildfire. Karen strutted into the courthouse wearing a power suit and carrying a thick folder of HOA documents, as if her organization's bylaws were constitutional amendments. She looked at me with that same smug confidence she'd shown that first day, certain she was about to defeat a simple farmer who didn't understand how things work. But when the judge entered the courtroom, something beautiful happened. "Good morning, everyone. Robert, it's wonderful to see you again." The color drained from Karen's face like someone had opened a valve. "Wait, you two, you know each other?" The judge smiled warmly. "I certainly do. Robert served with distinction on the bench in this very courthouse for over 2 decades. One of the most respected judges in the county's history. You could have heard an apple drop in that courtroom." Karen's mouth fell open, and her folder of HOA papers suddenly seemed very small. My attorney presented the evidence methodically: the security footage, the documentation of harassment, the baseless complaints, and the attempted destruction of property. The case was airtight. Karen tried to mount a defense, rambling about property values and community standards, but her argument crumbled under the weight of law and evidence. The judge didn't even need to deliberate. He found the HOA guilty on all counts and issued a comprehensive ruling that would protect not just my farm, but any agricultural property in the area from similar harassment. The financial penalties were substantially enough to cover enhanced security systems, legal fees, and compensation for the months of stress and harassment. More importantly, the court issued a permanent restraining order. No HOA representative could set foot on my property for any reason. Walking out of that courthouse, I watched Karen's neighbors look at her with the dawning realization that her crusade had cost their community dearly. The HOA's funds were depleted, their reputation was in ruins, and their leader had been exposed as someone who didn't understand the most basic principles of property rights. Justice, they say, had been served. But the story wasn't over yet. Asterisk. In the weeks following the court ruling, something wonderful began to happen. The victory wasn't just belonged to everyone who believed in fairness, respect, and the American values that built communities like ours. Karen tried to save face, claiming the HOA had been misinformed about legal boundaries, but her neighbors weren't buying it. The damage was done, and not just to her reputation. The lawsuit had drained the HOA's finances, and residents were facing special assessments to cover the legal costs. But here's what Karen never understood: this was never about winning or losing. It was about respect, community, and understanding what makes America great. One by one, families from the subdivision began visiting the farm. Not to complain, but to apologize. "We never wanted to fight with you," said Sarah, a young mother with 2 children clinging to her hands. "We moved here because we loved the idea of living near open farmland. Karen convinced us it was a problem. But we can see now how wrong that was." I looked at her kids, her eyes wide with wonder, at the endless rows of apple trees, and I thought about my grandfather's vision. He didn't just plant trees, he planted the seeds of community. "This farm isn't just mine," I told her. "It's part of what makes this place special. You and your family are welcome here anytime, as long as you respect the land and what it represents." Word spread through social media and local newspapers. Soon, my farm became more than just an orchard. Debt became a gathering place where the community could reconnect with the land, and with each other. We started hosting seasonal festivals where families could pick their own apples, enjoy fresh cider, and learn about sustainable farming. Children who had never seen where their food comes from got to experience the miracle of harvest. Parents shared stories of their own rural roots with kids who were growing up in a digital world. The hayrides became legendary, winding through 60 acres of family history while I shared stories of my grandfather's dreams and the generations who had worked this soil. The old barn, the one that had been vandalized with HOA rules, became the centerpiece of our cider-making demonstrations. But the most beautiful transformation happened in the people themselves. Neighbors who had barely spoken began working together on community projects. The subdivision's residents started their own gardens, inspired by what they'd learned at the farm. Property values actually increased as word spread about the unique character of a neighborhood that embraced both progress and heritage. As for Karen, well, karma has a way of teaching lessons that courtrooms can't. Within 6 months, the HOA voted her out of office. The financial strain from the lawsuit combined with her obvious lack of judgment, made her position untenable. I heard through the grapevine that she moved away, searching for a new community where her reputation hadn't preceded her. Sometimes, people have to learn the hard way that you can't build happiness by tearing down other people's dreams. These days, when I walk through the orchard in the early morning mist, I think about that day Karen stood at my property line, demanding I chop it all down. She saw obstacles where she should have seen opportunities. She saw problems where she should have seen possibilities. She thought she could intimidate me, erase my family's legacy, and bend the law to serve her narrow vision of perfection. Instead, she learned something that took me years to understand. True power doesn't come from forcing others to conform to your will. It comes from building something so beautiful, so meaningful, that others are inspired to be part of it. My grandfather planted these trees during the darkest economic times in our nation's history, believing in a future he might not live to see. Those roots, like the values that built this country, run too deep to be destroyed by those who mistake noise for strength or demands for leadership. Today, children play among the same trees that fed their grandparents. Families gather to celebrate the seasons and remember what it means to be connected to the land that sustains us all. And somewhere, an old judge who became a farmer again sleeps peacefully, knowing that justice isn't just served in courtrooms, it grows season by season. In the hearts of people who understand that the best communities are built on respect, not rules on understanding. Not ultimatums because some routes weather their apple trees or American values run far too deep to ever be chopped down. Asterisk.